MorningLine. Thanks for joining us. Nathan Grifffith is with us, Associate Professor of Belmont, talking about the royal family and the like. And, you know, the stuff that ends up in the society pages, of course, we all know in the past, I mean, just how huge Princess Diana was. And the story, and she remains just someone that will never be forgotten. But, you know, the family under a microscope, the royal family, and the changes. So Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. Go ahead.
Let me go back to Diana for a moment. She showed a talent for being involved in political causes, but not being political, and winning people's hearts, not just their respect, but also their hearts.
That's tricky to do, but she did,
and
right?
It's very impressive what she was able to do in that regard, yes.
Okay, and so, you just,
sorry,
no, it's such a tragic case, but you're right. So, no one else like her?
Not in the current scene that I could see.
No.
Most of them have some sort of baggage or some sort of. So, for example, King Charles seems to take a little bit more after his dad than after his mom, and his mom, for all she was queen, was never common, but could interact well with people regardless of their status. Right. So, Charles, I've not seen demonstrate that. Doesn't mean he can't, but his dad had trouble doing that.
Meaning it more difficult to relate to folks?
Yes.
Just more, when I see Prince Charles, I think stodgy.
Socially,
King Charles.
Well, socially clumsy.
Yeah.
Usually. Now, again, maybe he's learned. At least the last we saw of him in public, he was very, and Dinah was not. She was the opposite of that.
Right.
William has inherited from his mom this ability to sort of navigate things socially very easily and smoothly. Harry was always good at it. I remember seeing him. This is another example, sort of the public example role they play. I remember him pretending to have a race with Usain Bolt in Jamaica, one of the Commonwealth countries. Pretty sure it was for charity. And Harry, of course, you know, tried to get a fake head start, faked a limp, and you know, all sorts of stuff goofing around. So he was very good at it too. But
having the ability to interact with people, I would think, is such an important part of it. And but again, just like you see here, you know, some of the images. Now he will be king when his father passes.
Or steps down.
Or steps down. And as a result of that, now that means too, now his children would then be his heirs, correct? Harry's out of the picture forever being king, pretty much.
Yes, and part of that too is because he accepted, I don't know if there was a formal, so for example, Queen Elizabeth's uncle was the king, and he stepped down to marry, if I remember correctly, it was his uncle, stepped down to marry Wallace Warfield Simpson, and then her dad became king in his place because he was the next in line, and her uncle did not have any children. But if I remember correctly, the firstborn, whether male or female, they did change that a few years ago to as male or female, is the heir, the next in line. So it would be William, and then it would be, I think, George is his oldest son.
Okay.
Our oldest child.
There's William there, and as you said, I mean, both boys seem to be more, you know, able to, you know, relate to people and be more friendly or outgoing. I don't know, just compared to their father. But as far as Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, what they gave up, as you look at this, I mean, they're not necessarily, you see in the image, they're not in that photograph there. It seemed like, that life wasn't for them.
Yes, and I can imagine that role we talked about having to be always the example in public. If you think about being an actress, that might constrain roles you're able to take. You know, you think about, for example, you know, actors we know that take on roles that, you know, might be, a lot of actors want to take on a role that's going to be sort of socially provocative. It gives them a chance to say something, to do something unusual, or, you know, to sort of, to stretch their abilities. But there's an added element if you have to also be you have to bear the responsibility of representing a country while you do that. Then there's some roles you might not be able to take, or it might be difficult if you take them, or you know, something happens with that role that it becomes you think of sometimes the things that become lightning rods. And so that probably was putting a big constraint on what she was able to do, or at least potentially.
There would have been guidelines for her. So, for instance, had they stayed in the family, and I don't know, that's, I'm sure, just one part of the reason they left, and we'll talk about Prince Harry's thinking maybe on this in a moment, but if she were to take a role, if she was still in the family, and take a role that they objected to, or maybe didn't, so what are the repercussions?
Well, the reasons they would have the reasons they would have objected to it would have been because it would have painted them in the wrong light. Right, so because again they have to be very careful.
But again, she's playing a role.
A lot of people don't make that distinction very well, right? Okay. And so I can imagine. I mean, I'm imagining this as part of what it was, but also for Harry, that I mean, he's not going to be king. His older brother's in line, and then his older brother's first child after that. That's a lot of burden to have to put up with, and there's not any reason for him to do it. There's plenty of people there to do it who are going to be having to bear it. And so for the sake of his family and his privacy, I mean, you think about a lot of celebrities pursue their privacy and sometimes don't take roles because they want to maintain their privacy or keep a lower profile in order to remain private. Don't do a lot of interviews, don't do a lot of things that would get them in the public eye as much. And I think it's a decision on their part to try and be out of the public eye a little bit because they're going to have to be in it given who they are and the jobs that, at least the job she has, and then what and just him by birth, that they want to be able to control a little bit more the exposure that they put themselves out there, that they make themselves subject to.
It seemed like so many people were, finding it difficult to understand how you would walk away from something like that. But I was just thinking about the things that you've said there. I could totally understand why Harry decided to do something like this. I guess he walked away from a lot of the money. I doubt that he'll ever, be wanting for money, but that he walked away from that. But what he gained is the privacy and not being in the spotlight nonstop, as he had been for most of his life.
And a little bit of control over his life then, because again, that being in the spotlight also meant that you had to answer to the family. And then his grandmother, now his father, will be the head of that family, but then you have responsibilities that you have to maintain. And if you think about the stress, we in South preachers' kids. Sometimes, so I say this as a preacher's kid. My dad never did this to me, thankfully. But a lot of times preacher's kids feel like or are made to feel like that they represent their family in the church and therefore they can never put a foot wrong. And you see the stress that puts on them and sometimes how it doesn't work out well for them. So I can understand wanting to get out of that. But
there was some talk that he only wanted to step away for a year or something like that and then maybe come back. But you think that's probably it? Who knows?
I've never met him, but I could well imagine that as far as I understand, it's a long-term arrangement.
Yeah. I mean, and as you said, she has her acting career, and that's probably something they wanted to move forward with. All right. Again, the part of it too about the romance of king and queen and prince and princess and all of that. I wanted just to ask you, I mean, you talk about in this country the fascination with it. And I think part of the reason is we don't have something like that. But I think people just like thinking about kings and queens. There's a romantic version of it. And it would be, while I find myself sometimes torn thinking about, all right, all the wealth that goes into this and the money and the time, and is it worth it? Is it well spent? I just can't imagine the world without having the royals in England that I think represent, to me anyway, from afar. And as I said, I'm not some big royal watcher. Just a certain degree of respectability and properness and civility that is too often not there, and it dates back, and it hasn't changed a lot over the years. It's still the same civil, and you hope they're good people.
Well, and you think about the general fascination with royalty, not a new thing.
Okay, right.
You go back to
the movies and everything. Yeah.
Well, Le Morte d'Arthur.
Yeah.
The stories, the Arthurian legends, written by a Frenchman.
Right.
To talk about a Welsh legend, and there were two parts to that. One of which was sort of the soap opera, the romance, the intrigue, the who was kissing whom kind of thing. But then there was also the chivalry, and the interaction between those, our normal human desires that make us fallible sometimes, but then also the code of conduct that we aspire to live by that help us do better than that. And that interplay between those two. And so there's always that need for, that desire for, that to see those examples of that code of conduct and see people do it to help remind us what we can be and to help remind us to make a good decision.
And you really think that makes a difference in this day and age?
Yeah.
It does. I mean, it makes a difference just in the mood of a country, or?
Even so, I lived in Germany for a year in high school, and my host brother taught me German. And I would hear some curse words, and I asked him about, whether those were normal words or whether those were, and he said, well, you wouldn't use them in conversation with the chancellor, right? And so that's even there, where we're talking about a chancellor, a political figure, right? That there's this idea of social propriety. And so the royal family has, at their best, a role in helping to maintain sort of these social mores, these standards of what's right, what's wrong, what's appropriate to do, what's too far, that when we can observe those ourselves, those don't have to be enforced on us. So if we can learn by their example to restrain ourselves from doing all the things the law allows us to do or that we're able to do because they're not the right thing to do, then we don't have to have the law restrain us from doing them. And I think that's a very valuable thing. Whether it's a king, a queen, the legends that were told about George Washington, the cherry tree, for example, were told for that reason. Not that he ever chopped down a cherry tree or didn't.
Right, but he wouldn't tell a lie,
But the idea that you should not lie,
So those types of things, that's the example of it. And I'm trying to think, too, though, as I go back to that movie, The King's Speech, if you saw it, Colin Firth won the Oscar for it. And the whole idea of a king during a war giving a speech that was crucial, and this, again, I don't know how much power he had compared to, the prime minister at the time, Winston Churchill or the like. Churchill was handling all, but how important it was to be able to have a royal give a speech at a time when morale was down and you're in a world war. And that's where it hit home for me, the true power, at least at that time. I wonder if something like that would be able to be reproduced now if there was a war.
Well, and I'm not a huge fan of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, but at the same time, just like Winston Churchill, just like the King's Speech, the fireside chats with Churchill, or the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the speech he gave about on the bombing of Pearl Harbor, right? The day that will live in infamy. We have those moments, right, where people stepped up and said the things people needed to put us in the right frame of mind to address them appropriately. As opposed to going completely bonkers. I mean, we have human beings, we're social creatures, and sometimes when we get to be, if you see a large crowd of people walking down the street towards you, what do?
Well, me, I just walk right into them.
You're a reporter. You want to find out what's going on, right? A lot of people see a large crowd of people walking down the street and start walking the other direction because nothing good's going on there. We don't always make good, calm, rational decisions when we're in groups. We need somebody to step up and help us do that sometimes to show us that, okay, that's...
And the nation listened, and it makes a difference in a time of real stress, maybe. And anyway, that's where it hit home for me. I go, wow, that was important. We got a phone call. Like I said, we can take a few of those throughout the show if you have a question or comment about the Royals. Stacy, good morning. Hi, Stacy.
Hi, Nick.
Hey.
You might remember, because you and I have both been here for years, that Princess Anne and Prince Edward were both here in Nashville on separate occasions. Princess Anne is an equestrian, and she was here for some, I think, horse show charity or something, and I don't remember why Princess Edward was here, but I was at both news conferences, and there's a whole protocol. You talk about covering celebrities in general and what you're told you can ask and can't ask and whatever. There's just a whole protocol as far as the royals as to what you can even say and how you address them. But beyond that, just I wanted to get into your question about the fascination of the royals.
What do you think?
They're sort of a guilty pleasure for me, and I think it dates back to as far as the general interest in them in this country. We had our royal family, that was the Kennedys, and I was very much into them too, and where I became disillusioned was about the time of Chappaquiddick. I mean, I remember when I was a little kid, there was a book called JFK Boyhood to White House, and it talked about how, it was a children's book, and it talked about how he could have been a playboy, but he was a public servant. And they mentioned Rosemary, and they said she was teaching at a convent somewhere, as opposed to saying she was mentally retarded, or I guess mentally challenged is the word we use now. So, I think there's a number of us that remember back to the Kennedy era, seeing Jackie and her kids on the cover of McCall's magazine, and so that there's that whole thing. And there's, if you watched at all the funeral of Queen Elizabeth, there's just nothing like that pageantry. And I just had a question for your guest. I don't know the answer to this, and I'm wondering if he might. I remember, again, I've been fascinated with this for a long time, watching Prince Charles' investiture when he was, I think, 21, something like that. And I'm just wondering when, now that Prince William is the new Prince of Wales, if there will be an investiture of that nature or the same ceremony, and if, like Prince Charles, it'll be televised.
Let me start with I don't know, but my guess would be yes. And I know that, for example,
Stacey.
Sorry, that Queen Elizabeth's formal crowning, I can't remember the name for that, investiture with the crown, didn't happen until over a year after or close to a year before she took it over. After she took it over, it was about a year later. And so it's well possible that would still happen with William. In fact, I imagine it would, because it's tradition, and again, a lot of their influence comes from maintaining these traditions and these unwritten rules. And so I would think they would. And it actually makes sense for it to be a little bit later, because you don't have them all at one time, right? The expense. Also, that you spread it out a little bit. You sort of keep things a little bit more. I guess sort of like how the NFL sometimes, right? It tries to move things to take up more of the calendar. There may be an element of that to it as well. But at the very least, there's sort of they don't seem like they're being rushed to do it, I would imagine, and not wanting to crowd the calendar and give respectful time to let the nation mourn for Queen Elizabeth.
You know, one point she made, and Stacey's done a lot of writing as a journalist herself. It was just interesting. I hadn't thought about that. I was just looking at here. Someone was texting me about when I think some of the royal family came here back in, was it 2004, I think, William and Harry visited Nashville. Maybe in 2004, I believe, back when the protocol for journalists to, as she said, there was all kinds of, different, and look, when we go to maybe cover the president coming, we all have to have, CIA background checks and all this for security. I assume it's the same thing for the royals to a degree, but I wonder if there's a certain protocol. Journalists here will ask anyone, including a president, a hard question if they have to be asked it. I don't know how different it may be for the royals, or if journalists, especially in Great Britain, handle it differently.
Not being a journalist, I can only guess.
Okay.
I have a colleague I might could.
You don't see the ambush interviews, if you will, but I imagine there's all types of protocol for dealing with media, and I'm sure they control a lot of it from their side.
If you were to give them an ambush interview, you probably would never get another one again.
Right, and I think you would be vilified maybe in Britain if you were to go after somehow, And
they don't do a whole lot of interviews, again, because it makes it difficult to maintain. It's that they're not going to.
There'd be a lot of no comments. If you're asking them to comment on things happening in society and they don't want to take a side. Is that why they don't?
They're not that interesting in terms of an interview, right?
Right.
Because they can't say things publicly.
Exactly. That's why sometimes when I would follow, well, I just don't know what they stand for. I wonder, and then you have to step back and say, well, they stand for, as you said, the figurehead, the PR version of things, to look and be a certain way, as opposed to taking any side on any social issues specifically.
And that would damage their ability to do that, to do the former if they did the latter. Yeah.
Interesting. All right, we'll take a break. We'll be back with our final segment. Thank you, Stacey, for your question. Those are good. We'll talk more, wrapping things up right after this. Stay with us.